Get out!
A police officer stood over a black man in a quiet cafe, his jaw clenched.
Are you deaf? I said get out! You black people are just loitering around here, bothering everyone.
The man set down his coffee cup, slowly, unfazed.
I'm having breakfast with my mother, officer. I don't care if it's your mother or the president.
The officer leaned closer, his voice lowered to a growl.
You don't belong here. Go.
Everyone in the cafe turned to look. A child clutched his mother's hand. No one dared breathe. The man looked up. Calm. Almost too calm. What the officer didn't know was that the man he was trying to get out had something in his jacket pocket. Something that would make him turn pale the moment he saw it. But before we get to that moment, let me take you back to the beginning, to the morning when everything was still peaceful. Briarwood, Virginia, a small town tucked into the Shenandoah Valley, about 2 hours west of Washington, D.C. The kind of place that shows up on postcards, old oak trees lining Main Street, brick storefronts with hand-painted signs, a farmer's market setting up 2 blocks down, where someone was already arguing over the price of peaches. It was early October. The air had that first crisp bite of fall. Leaves were just starting to turn gold along the ridgeline. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance. If you didn't know any better, you'd think nothing bad could ever happen in a place like this. Caleb Preston pulled into town just after 8 in the morning. He was driving a rented gray sedan. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive. Just a regular car for a regular visit. He'd left D.C. the night before, drove through the dark, slept a few hours at his mother's house, and woke up before she did. Today was her 68th birthday. Caleb was 42. Tall, lean, with close-cropped hair and a neatly trimmed beard starting to show flecks of gray. He wore a charcoal Henley, clean dark jeans, and a simple silver watch. No suit, no tie, no badge. Nothing that said anything about who he was or what he did for a living. And that was on purpose. When Caleb was off duty, he was off duty. He wasn't Special Agent Preston. He was just Gloria's son. The one who didn't visit enough and always forgot to call on Sundays. He walked into the Copper Kettle at 8:30. The cafe sat in the corner of Main and Birch, a cozy little spot with exposed brick walls, mismatched vintage chairs, and a chalkboard menu behind the counter. The smell hit you the second you opened the door. Dark roast coffee, warm butter, and something sweet baking in the back. Lemon scones. Gloria's favorite. Nina Castellano, the owner, was behind the counter wiping down the espresso machine. She was a woman in her mid-30s with flour on her apron and a pencil behind her ear. She looked up and smiled when Gloria walked in. "Gloria, happy birthday, sweetheart. Your usual table?" Gloria Preston moved slowly, but with dignity. 68 years old, retired school teacher, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a lavender blouse she'd ironed that morning. She had the kind of face that made you trust her immediately. "Nina, this is my son, Caleb, the one I keep telling you about." Nina extended her hand. "The mysterious son from D.C. Finally. Your mama talks about you every single week." Caleb smiled. "She exaggerates." "I do not," Gloria said, swatting his arm. Nina seated them at a window table. Sunlight poured through the glass, catching the steam rising from their cups. Gloria ordered her lemon scone and chamomile tea. Caleb got black coffee. They sat across from each other, and for a few minutes, the world was exactly right. "You look tired," Gloria said, studying his face. "Drove in late." "You work too much." "You say that every time." "Because it's true every time." Caleb grinned. He looked around the cafe. It was mostly full now. Older couples, a few families, a young mother with a toddler in a high chair. Everyone was white. He and his mother were the only black people in the room. He noticed something else, too. Gloria had chosen the table by the window, but she kept glancing toward the back corner, the quieter spot, the less visible spot. "You usually sit back there, don't you?" he asked. Gloria sipped her tea. "I like the quiet." He didn't push. But he understood. He'd always understood. Then the front door swung open, and the energy in the room shifted. A Briarwood police cruiser had pulled up right outside the window. Two officers stepped out. The first was a stocky man with a buzz cut and a ruddy, sun-roughened face. Sergeant Dale Whitmore. He walked like the sidewalk owed him money. Behind him, younger and thinner, was Officer Todd Brannigan, adjusting his belt and keeping 2 steps back. Whitmore pushed through the cafe door. He didn't go to the counter. He didn't order anything. He stood just inside the entrance, scanned the room from left to right, and stopped. His eyes landed on Caleb. And they stayed there. Whitmore didn't hesitate. He walked straight past the counter, past the couple sharing a muffin, past the young mother wiping her toddler's chin. He crossed that cafe like a man on a mission. And his mission was the only black man in the room. He stopped right at the edge of Caleb's table, close enough that his belt buckle was at eye level. He didn't greet them, didn't nod, didn't glance at Gloria. He just stood there, looking down at Caleb the way you'd look at something rotting on the sidewalk. "Morning," Caleb said. Whitmore didn't return it. "You, stand up." Caleb tilted his head. "Excuse me? Did I stutter? Stand up. I need to see some ID." The cafe went silent. Not the lazy silence of a Saturday morning, the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. A fork froze halfway to someone's mouth. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter like a long, low warning. Caleb kept his voice steady. "Can I ask what this is about?" "It's about me giving you an order and you following it." Whitmore shifted his weight forward. His hand drifted to his belt. Not to his weapon, but close enough to send a message. "We've had reports of a suspicious individual in this area. Matches your description. So I need to see ID, right now." Gloria set her teacup down. Her hand trembled. "Officer, this is my son. He's visiting me for my birth. Ma'am." Whitmore didn't look at her, not even a glance. "I wasn't talking to you." The words landed on the table like a slap. Gloria's mouth closed. Her eyes dropped to her lap. 68 years of moments just like this one passed across her face in a single breath. Then she folded her hands together and said nothing. Caleb saw it, every bit of it. The way his mother's shoulders drew inward, the way she made herself smaller, like she'd spent a lifetime practicing how to disappear in rooms where she wasn't wanted. His jaw tightened. But his voice didn't change. "My name is Caleb Preston. I'm visiting my mother for her birthday. We're having breakfast. That's all." Whitmore stared at him for a long moment. Then he sniffed, slow and deliberate. "Preston, that's your real name?" "Yes, sir." "Got ID to prove it?" "I do, but I'd like to know, am I being detained?" The air thickened. Behind Whitmore, Officer Brannigan shifted his weight from foot to foot. He stared at the floor, then the ceiling, then his own shoes, anywhere but at what was happening in front of him. Whitmore took another half step forward. His shadow stretched across the table, across Gloria's lavender blouse, across the untouched lemon scones sitting between them. "Let me make this simple." His voice dropped low. Quiet. The kind of quiet that cuts deeper than shouting. "You show me your ID like a good, cooperative citizen. Or I put you in cuffs and we figure this out down at the station. Pick one." Caleb read Whitmore's face the way he'd been trained to read faces for 12 years. The locked jaw, the flared nostrils, the flat, hard stare that had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with control. This man hadn't walked in here following a report. He'd walked in here following an instinct. And that instinct kicked in the moment he saw a black face in a white room. Caleb reached for his wallet. Slowly. Very slowly. He knew the rules, the unwritten ones, the ones no police academy teaches, but every black man in America learns before he's old enough to drive. Keep your hands visible. Move like you're underwater. Don't give them a reason. He pulled out his Virginia driver's license, his personal one, not the FBI credential tucked in his jacket pocket. He placed it flat on the table and slid it forward with 2 fingers. Whitmore snatched it off the table, held it inches from his face, squinting at the print like he was trying to find something wrong with it. Arlington. He said the word like it left a bad taste. Long way from home. About 2 hours. What exactly brings you to Briarwood? Like I said, my mother's birthday. Whitmore turned the license over, looked at Caleb, looked at Gloria, back at Caleb. His lip curled slightly. People say a lot of things. He unclipped his radio. Dispatch, I need a check on a Virginia DL. He read the number out loud. Slowly, deliberately. Every digit echoing through the silent cafe so everyone could hear. While they waited, Whitmore didn't step back, didn't give them an inch of space. He stood over their table like a prison guard doing a count, letting the silence press down on them like a weight. Gloria stared into her tea. Her fingers were laced together so tight, her knuckles had turned white. Caleb wanted to reach across and hold her hand, tell her it was okay. But he knew that any sudden movement could be labeled aggressive, could become an excuse, could turn a bad morning into a headline. So he sat still, hands flat on the table, and waited. The radio crackled. Subject comes back clean, no warrants, no flags. Clean, no warrants, no flags. That should have been the end of it. In any fair world, in any honest encounter, this is where the officer nods, hands back the license, and says, "Sorry for the trouble, enjoy your morning." Whitmore didn't do any of that. He clipped his radio back onto his shoulder, glanced at the license one last time. Then he flicked it onto the table like he was tossing aside a losing hand of cards. Stand up. Caleb looked at him evenly. The check came back clean. I know what it said. Stand up. On what grounds? On the grounds that I'm the one wearing the badge. Caleb pushed his chair back and rose, slowly. He was taller than Whitmore by 3 full inches, and when he stood, something shifted in the sergeant's face. Not fear, but the brief, flickering discomfort of a man who suddenly found himself looking up instead of down. Whitmore covered it the only way he knew how. He got louder. Step away from the table. Hands where I can see them. Officer, I haven't done anything. Hands up, now. Caleb stepped aside. He raised both hands, palms open, fingers spread. The universal posture of surrender. The posture of a man proving to a room full of strangers that he is not dangerous, that his body is not a weapon, that he deserves to live through the next 60 seconds. Whitmore circled behind him. Spread your feet, and right there, between the chalkboard menu and the vintage chairs, under the warm light of a Saturday morning, with the scent of lemon scones still drifting through the air, Sergeant Dale Whitmore ran his hands over Caleb Preston's body, down his sides, along his waistband, around his ankles. A full pat-down, right in the center of the cafe. A woman at the next table pressed her hand over her mouth. The young mother pulled her toddler onto her lap and turned the child's face away. Nina gripped the counter with both hands, a dish towel twisted between white knuckles. And Gloria watched. She watched her son stand with his arms out and legs apart, while a uniformed stranger put hands on him like he was a criminal. Her lips pressed together until they vanished. A tear slipped down her left cheek. She caught it with the back of her hand before it reached her jaw. Whitmore finished. He found nothing. There was nothing to find. There was never going to be anything to find. He stepped back. This was the moment to stop. Every regulation said stop. Every protocol said stop. Every shred of human decency said stop. But Dale Whitmore had done the math. He'd made a scene. He'd gone too far to back down now. Walking away would mean admitting he was wrong. And admitting he was wrong in front of a room full of people who just watched him frisk an innocent man, that was something Dale Whitmore would never do. So instead of stopping, he leaned in. "People in here are uncomfortable," he announced, loud enough for every table to hear. "I think it's best you leave." Caleb lowered his arms. "I'm a paying customer, sitting with my mother on her birthday. I haven't broken a single law." Whitmore closed the distance between them. So close, Caleb could smell the stale coffee on his breath, the sharp bite of cheap aftershave clinging to his collar. "I'm not asking." His voice was barely a whisper now. "I'm telling you. Get out." Caleb didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, arms at his sides, breathing slow and even. 12 years of FBI training had taught him how to stay calm when everything around him was falling apart, how to read a room, how to control a situation without raising his voice. But this wasn't a federal operation. There was no backup on standby, no wire, no team watching through a one-way mirror. This was a cafe in a small town where he had no authority, no protection, and no badge on display. Right now, he was just a black man, standing in front of a white cop who had already decided how this was going to end. Whitmore tilted his head toward the window. "Your car, that gray sedan out front, that yours?" Caleb exhaled through his nose. "It's a rental, a rental." Whitmore repeated it slowly, like it confirmed something. He turned to Brannigan. "Todd, go run the plates, and take a look inside while you're at it." Caleb's voice came quick but controlled. "You don't have a warrant to search that vehicle." Whitmore smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing to do with happiness. "I don't need a warrant. I can smell marijuana on you. That gives me probable cause." It was a lie. A blatant, shameless lie. There was no marijuana. There had never been any marijuana. Every person in that cafe who was sitting close enough knew it. The only thing anyone could smell in that room was coffee and baked goods and the faint trace of Whitmore's aftershave. But Whitmore said it with the confidence of a man who had used that exact line before, many times, on many people who looked exactly like Caleb. Brannigan hesitated. He stood halfway between the table and the door, his weight shifting, his eyes darting between his sergeant and the man they both knew had done nothing wrong. For 1 second, one brief, flickering second, it looked like he might say something. He didn't. He turned and walked out the door. Through the window, Caleb watched him pop the trunk of the rental sedan, watched him open the glove compartment, watched him rifle through a duffel bag that held nothing but clothes, a birthday card, and a wrapped box containing a pearl bracelet Caleb had picked out for his mother 3 weeks ago. Inside the cafe, nobody moved. The older couple, 2 tables over, exchanged a look. The husband opened his mouth, then closed it. The wife shook her head slightly, a tiny, almost invisible gesture that said, "Don't get involved." Nina stood behind the counter, gripping the edge so hard her fingernails were white. She swallowed once, then she spoke. "Dale, come on. This is way too much." Whitmore turned on her like she'd pulled a fire alarm. "Nina, you want me to call the health department down here for a surprise inspection? Because I can do that. I can do that today. So how about you stay behind that counter and mind your own business?" Nina's mouth snapped shut. She took a step back. Her eyes went glassy, and she looked down at her hands. She didn't speak again. Gloria was still seated. She hadn't moved from her chair. Her tea had gone cold. The lemon scone sat untouched, a tiny birthday candle still lying beside the plate where Nina had placed it earlier as a surprise. Gloria's hands were trembling. Not the slight tremble of nerves, but the deep, rhythmic shaking of a woman fighting every instinct in her body to stay seated, while her son was being humiliated 3 feet in front of her. The front door opened. Brannigan came back in. His face was blank. His hands were empty. "Nothing, Sarge. Car's clean." Nothing. Clean. Again. 2 checks. 2 searches. 0 evidence of anything. And still, Dale Whitmore did not stop. He couldn't stop. That was the thing. He'd crossed too many lines to go backward. If he walked away now, every person in this cafe would know, really know, not just suspect, that this had never been about a report, never been about marijuana, never been about safety. It had only ever been about one thing. And that one thing was standing 6 feet tall, with his hands open and his mouth shut, waiting for it to be over. Whitmore's face was flushed. A vein pulsed at his temple. His breathing had changed, shorter, faster. He was a man whose bluff had been called, and the only card he had left was the badge on his chest. He pulled his handcuffs from the back of his belt. The metal caught the light as they swung from his finger. Turn around. Caleb's eyes went to the cuffs, then back to Whitmore. You're handcuffing me. For officer safety, while I sort this out. Sort what out? Your checks came back clean. Your search came back clean. There's nothing to sort out. Whitmore stepped forward. I said turn around. Last time Whitmore pointed at her without looking. Sit down. Caleb turned around. He placed his hands behind his back. And in the middle of the copper kettle, with the morning sun still streaming through the windows, Sergeant Dale Whitmore closed a pair of steel handcuffs around the wrists of an innocent man. The click was the loudest sound in the room. A teenage girl in the corner booth had her phone out. She'd been recording for the last 4 minutes. Her father leaned over and whispered for her to stop. She shook her head and kept the camera steady. An older white man at the next table, silver hair, flannel shirt, reading glasses hanging around his neck, finally spoke up. Sergeant, this doesn't seem right. Whitmore wheeled on him. Sir, mind your business, unless you want to join him. The man went quiet. He looked down at his newspaper. His hands were shaking, but he didn't say another word. That was the room. That was the whole room. A dozen people who knew this was wrong, who could feel it in their chests, in their stomachs, in the sick twist of their conscience. And not one of them did a thing. Whitmore grabbed Caleb's arm above the elbow and started walking him toward the door, past every table, past every pair of eyes, past the woman covering her mouth, and the toddler who didn't understand, and the old man who tried and failed, and Nina, who stood behind her counter with tears running silently down her face. Each step was slow, deliberate, a parade of power through a room full of witnesses who would remember this morning for the rest of their lives. Gloria sat frozen in her chair, both hands pressed flat against the table. Her eyes followed her son as he was walked across the room like a prisoner. The birthday candle beside her plate had rolled off and fallen to the floor. Nobody picked it up. At the door, Whitmore paused. He adjusted his grip on Caleb's arm and leaned close to his ear. But he didn't whisper. He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. You people always think you can just walk in anywhere you want, sit anywhere you want, like you own the place. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. This ain't D.C., boy. The word landed like a grenade. Boy. Caleb stopped walking. He planted both feet on the threshold, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted. And for the first time since Whitmore had walked into that cafe, something changed in Caleb's eyes. The patience was still there. The control was still there. But underneath it, deep, quiet, and absolutely certain, was something else entirely. He turned his head just enough to look Whitmore in the face. Sergeant Whitmore. His voice was calm, soft, almost gentle. And it was the most dangerous sound in the room. Before you take me through that door, I need you to do something for me. Whitmore frowned. You're not in a position to... My left jacket pocket. Caleb's voice didn't waver. Reach into my left jacket pocket. Something in Caleb's voice made Whitmore's hand stop mid-air. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a plea. It was the quiet, steady command of a man who had spent over a decade telling dangerous people what to do and having them listen. Whitmore frowned. His fingers hovered near the door frame. The cafe behind them was dead silent. Not even the espresso machine dared to make a sound. "My left jacket pocket," Caleb repeated. Same tone, same volume. Like he had all the time in the world. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. He glanced at Brannigan, who stood 3 steps back with his arms hanging limp at his sides. Brannigan offered nothing. No help, no guidance, just a blank, terrified stare. Whitmore reached into Caleb's left jacket pocket. His fingers found something. Leather. Small. Folded. He pulled it out. A credential case. Dark leather, worn smooth at the edges. Whitmore held it in his palm for a second, feeling its weight. Then he flipped it open. The gold caught the light first. A shield, polished and heavy, stamped with an eagle and a circle of stars. Below it, a laminated photo ID. Caleb's face, clean and sharp. And above the photo, 5 words in bold blue lettering against a pale background. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Below that, in smaller print, Special Agent Caleb Preston. Whitmore stared at it. The color left his face in stages. First his cheeks, which had been flushed red for the last 20 minutes. Then his neck, then his ears. It drained out of him like someone had pulled a plug, and what was left behind was a shade of gray-white that made him look like a man who had just opened a door and found the floor gone beneath him. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The credential case trembled in his hand. His grip had gone soft. So soft, the case nearly slipped through his fingers and clattered to the floor. Behind him, Brannigan leaned forward just enough to see what Whitmore was holding. His reaction was immediate. He took 1 full step backward and hit the wall. His shoulders pressed flat against the brick. His face went the color of old paper. The cafe had shifted. You could feel it, like the air pressure had dropped 10 degrees in a single second. The silence was no longer the fearful silence of people watching an injustice unfold. It was the breathless, electric silence of people watching the world flip upside down. Caleb turned his body to face Whitmore fully. His hands were still cuffed behind his back. His voice never rose above the volume of a normal conversation. Every word was measured, precise, and delivered with the calm authority of a man who had testified in federal courtrooms, briefed intelligence directors, and stared down suspects far more dangerous than a small-town sergeant with a power complex. My name is Caleb Preston. I am a senior special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Washington Field Office, Counterintelligence Division. I have served 12 years in federal law enforcement. He paused. Let those words fill the room. In the last 35 minutes, you have conducted an illegal stop without reasonable suspicion. You have performed an unlawful search of a federal agent's vehicle without a warrant or valid probable cause. You have fabricated the odor of marijuana to justify that search. You have effected a false arrest, and you have violated Title 18 United States Code Sections 242, 241, 1001, and 1495. He listed the statutes the way a surgeon names instruments, without emotion, without hesitation, without mercy. Remove the handcuffs. Now. Whitmore's hands were shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to get the key into the lock. The metal scraped against metal. The cuffs clicked open and fell away. Caleb brought his arms forward. He rolled his shoulders once, straightened the cuffs of his hemley, adjusted his watch. He did not rub his wrists. He would not give this man that satisfaction. He would not show a single mark that Whitmore had left on him. He turned and walked back through the cafe, past the same tables, past the same eyes. But everything was different now. The woman who had covered her mouth was staring at Whitmore. The old man with the newspaper was sitting up straight. Nina had both hands pressed to her chest, her lips parted, tears still wet on her cheeks. Caleb sat down across from his mother. Gloria was looking at him with wide, shining eyes. Her hands were still trembling, but something new had crept into her expression. Something between relief and fierce, burning pride. He picked up his coffee cup. It had gone cold a long time ago. He took a sip anyway. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. It picked up on the second ring. "Denise? It's Caleb." His voice was quiet, conversational, like he was calling about weekend plans. "I need you to send a team down to Briarwood, Virginia. Local PD situation. Civil rights violation. I'll brief you when you get here." A pause. He listened. "Yeah." He looked at his mother, then at Whitmore, still standing at the door, frozen, credential case dangling from his limp hand. It happened again. Again. That single word carried more weight than everything that had come before it. It told you this wasn't the first time. Not for Caleb, not for 1,000 other men who looked like him. The badge in the pocket was the exception. The morning that led to it was the rule. Whitmore didn't move from the doorway. He stood there like a man whose legs had forgotten how to work. The credential case still dangled from his hand. His mouth kept opening and closing, small, useless movements, like a fish dropped on dry concrete. Finally, words came, broken, stumbling. "Look, I had no way of knowing." Caleb didn't look up. He was writing in a small leather notebook. Date, time, location, badge numbers, names of both officers, witnesses. He wrote the way he always wrote, clean, methodical, unhurried. The handwriting of a man who had built federal cases on details smaller than these. Whitmore tried again. "There was a report. I was just doing my—" "There was no report." Caleb's pen didn't stop. "You and I both know that." Whitmore's mouth closed. He looked at Brannigan for help. Brannigan was pressed against the far wall, arms crossed, staring at a spot on the floor. He had already made his calculation. Whatever ship Whitmore was on, Brannigan was stepping off. The cafe was still frozen. Nobody had left. But the energy had reversed completely. 5 minutes ago, these people were afraid to look up. Now, they couldn't look away. Every pair of eyes was locked on Whitmore, watching a man shrink in real time. Nina came out from behind the counter. She walked to Caleb and Gloria's table with careful steps. Her face was blotched red, her hands still shaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have—" Gloria reached out and took Nina's hand. "You didn't do this, sweetheart. Don't carry that." Nina pressed her other hand over her mouth. She squeezed Gloria's fingers and stepped back. Caleb looked at Whitmore one last time. "I advise you to stay exactly where you are, Sergeant. Do not leave this location. Do not contact your department. Do not make any phone calls. Everything from this point forward will be documented." Whitmore leaned against the door frame. His legs seemed to give slightly. The ruddy color that had burned in his face all morning was gone, replaced by something gray and hollow. He looked 10 years older than he had 30 minutes ago. 43 minutes later, 2 black Chevrolet Suburbans pulled up outside the Copper Kettle. They parked nose to tail, right behind Whitmore's cruiser. 4 people in dark suits stepped out. Leading them was a woman in her early 50s, tall, sharp-featured, close-cropped natural hair, and a look on her face that could cut steel. ASAC. Denise Harlow, Assistant Special Agent in Charge, FBI Richmond Field Office. She walked into the cafe and assessed the room in 3 seconds. The handcuffs on the table, the shaken witnesses, the sergeant against the wall, Caleb sitting calmly with his mother. She went to Whitmore first. "Sergeant Dale Whitmore?" "Yes, ma'am." ASAC Denise Harlow, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She held up her credential case. Let him see it. Let him feel the weight. You are the subject of an active federal civil rights investigation, effective immediately. She extended her hand, palm up. Your service weapon, your badge, now. Whitmore's hand went to his holster, his fingers wrapped around the grip. Then, slowly, he pulled the weapon out, checked the safety, and handed it over. His badge followed. He unclipped it and placed it in Harlow's open palm, like he was handing over a piece of himself. Harlow passed both items to an agent behind her without looking. She turned to Brannigan. Officer Brannigan, you will be interviewed as both a witness and a potential accessory. Do not leave. Do not communicate with Sergeant Whitmore. Brannigan nodded fast, mechanical. He looked like a man trying not to throw up. The teenage girl who had recorded everything walked over to Caleb's table. She turned her phone screen toward him. I got everything, she said quietly. From the beginning. Caleb watched 3 seconds of the footage. Enough to see Whitmore's hand on his arm, enough to hear the word boy through the tiny speaker. He nodded. Thank you. That took courage. Harlow took the girl's name and contact information. The video was logged, preserved, and tagged as primary evidence. Outside, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Neighbors, shop owners, people from the farmer's market 2 blocks down. They stood in clusters, voices low, pointing at the black SUVs and the cruiser sitting between them, like a toy between 2 wolves. Word was already spreading. In a town this small, it moved faster than any headline. By noon, every person in Briarwood would know what happened at the Copper Kettle. By evening, the whole country would. The FBI moved fast. Within 48 hours, the Richmond field office had opened a formal civil rights investigation under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under Color of Law. 2 agents were assigned full-time to the case. Their first stop was the Briarwood Police Department's Internal Affairs Office. They requested Sergeant Dale Whitmore's complete personnel file. What they found inside should have been a surprise. It wasn't. 6 prior complaints of racial profiling, 2 allegations of excessive force, 1 formal grievance filed by a local pastor after Whitmore stopped his 17-year-old son 3 times in 2 weeks for driving suspiciously in his own neighborhood. Every single complaint had been investigated internally. Every single one had been dismissed. The language in the closure memos was almost identical each time. Insufficient evidence to substantiate, stamped and signed by the same person. Deputy Chief Warren Schofield. When agents sat Schofield down for an interview, he came in wearing his dress uniform and a confident smile. He told them Whitmore was a solid officer with a clean record. He said the complaints were exaggerated. Said the community had a complicated relationship with law enforcement. Said these things happen. Then the agents placed Whitmore's personnel file on the table between them. All 6 complaints, all 2 use of force reports, all the closure memos, with Schofield's signature at the bottom. The smile disappeared. When they informed him that knowingly concealing a pattern of civil rights violations and obstructing a federal investigation carried its own set of charges, Schofield's confident posture collapsed like a building with its foundation pulled out. He asked for a lawyer before the next question was finished. Meanwhile, the video had found its way into the world. The teenage girl, her name was kept out of the press at her family's request, uploaded the footage to social media 2 days after the incident. She posted it without commentary, no caption, no hashtag, just 6 minutes and 43 seconds of unedited video shot from a corner booth in a small-town cafe. It hit 10 million views in the first 18 hours. By the end of the week, it had crossed 50 million. Every major news outlet in the country picked it up. The headline wrote itself, and every version was essentially the same. Officer handcuffs FBI agent in Café. Didn't know who he was. The footage was devastating. It captured everything. Whitmore's hand on Caleb's arm, the pat-down between the vintage chairs, Gloria's tear, the word boy, clear as a bell through the cafe's ambient noise. And it captured the thing that no written report could ever convey, the casual, unhurried cruelty of a man who believed with absolute certainty that he would never face consequences. But what made the video truly viral wasn't the badge reveal. It was the conversation that followed. Comment sections exploded, not just with outrage, with recognition. Thousands of people sharing their own stories, their own traffic stops, their own cafe moments, their own versions of Dale Whitmore. And underneath the outrage, a harder question began to surface. One that the news anchors kept circling back to. One that the op-eds kept landing on. One that sat like a stone in the stomach of everyone who watched. What if he hadn't been FBI? What if there had been no badge in that pocket? What happens to the man who goes through the exact same morning but has nothing to pull out except his dignity? Everyone already knew the answer. That was what made it unbearable. The trial began 11 weeks later in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Virginia. It lasted 4 days. It didn't need more. The prosecution's case was built on 3 pillars: the video, the witnesses, and the lies. The video was played for the jury twice, once in full, without interruption. The second time, frame by frame, with FBI forensic analysts walking the jury through each moment. The fabricated marijuana claim, the illegal vehicle search, the unlawful detention, the racial slur. Every second was annotated. Every violation was cataloged. 7 witnesses testified. Nina Castellano took the stand on the second day. She spoke for 40 minutes. She described the moment Whitmore walked through her door, the way he ignored Gloria, the way he made Caleb stand, the sound the handcuffs made when they clicked shut. Her voice broke 3 times. She didn't stop. The older man in the flannel shirt, his name was Arthur Bowen, testified that he had tried to speak up and was threatened by Whitmore in front of the entire cafe. His hands shook the entire time he was on the stand, but his words were clear. Caleb testified last. He sat in the witness chair the way he sat in every federal proceeding, straight-backed, composed, precise. He recounted the events in chronological order, no embellishment, no emotion, just facts, delivered one after another with the steady rhythm of a metronome. His composure was more powerful than any outburst could have been. Whitmore's defense was simple. He claimed he was responding to a legitimate report of suspicious activity. His attorney argued that Whitmore had followed standard procedure and had no way of knowing Caleb's identity. The prosecution dismantled this in under 10 minutes. They pulled dispatch records, they pulled call logs, they pulled radio transcripts. There was no report. There had never been a report. No one had called. No one had flagged anything. The suspicious individual matching his description existed only in Dale Whitmore's imagination and his prejudice. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 16 minutes. Guilty, on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a 61-year-old woman who had spent 30 years on the federal bench, looked at Whitmore for a long moment before she spoke. 36 months in federal prison. Permanent forfeiture of law enforcement certification. Complete loss of pension and retirement benefits. A lifetime ban from holding any position of public authority. Whitmore stood motionless as the sentence was read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Whitmore didn't seem to feel it. Brannigan cooperated fully with the investigation. He provided a detailed account of Whitmore's behavior, not just that morning, but over the 2 years they had been partnered together. The patterns he described matched every complaint in the file. His cooperation earned him a lesser outcome: termination from the department and 2 years of supervised probation. But his testimony was instrumental in securing the conviction. Deputy Chief Schofield resigned before the investigation reached him formally. It didn't matter. The FBI's findings were forwarded to the Department of Justice, which placed the entire Briarwood Police Department under a federal consent decree. Mandatory reform, independent oversight, retraining of every officer from the top down. The Copper Kettle became something it had never intended to be, a landmark. Nina didn't fight it. She put a small, hand-lettered sign in the front window right next to the Daily Specials board. It said 5 words. Everyone is welcome here. Always. And when a reporter from the Richmond Times caught up with Gloria Preston outside the cafe 3 weeks after the trial, she stopped on the sidewalk and gave the only quote she would ever give to the press. I raised my son to be strong enough to stay calm when the world tells him he doesn't belong. I'm proud of him. She paused, looked at the cafe window behind her. But I shouldn't have to be proud of that. No mother should have to raise her child to survive something that never should have happened in the first place. So where are they now? Caleb Preston went back to Washington. He returned to his desk at the FBI field office the following Monday, like nothing had happened. His supervisor recommended him for a commendation, official recognition of his conduct during the incident. Caleb declined. When asked why, he said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. I don't want to be celebrated for surviving something that never should have happened. 6 months later, he was promoted to supervisory special agent. He didn't make a speech, didn't do interviews. He showed up, did the work, and went home. And every month, every single month without fail, he drove 2 hours west to Briarwood to have breakfast with his mother at the Copper Kettle. Same table by the window, same lemon scone, same black coffee. He never sat in the back. Gloria Preston retired from quiet. That's the best way to say it. For decades, she had folded herself small in a town that never quite made space for her. Back corners, head down, smiling when it was easier than speaking. After the trial, the Briarwood Town Council created a civilian oversight board for the police department as part of the federal consent decree. They needed community members to serve. Gloria's name was the first one submitted. She accepted without a second thought. These days, she sits at the front table at the Copper Kettle, right by the window, where everyone can see her. And she doesn't move for anyone. Dale Whitmore is serving his 36-month sentence at a federal correctional facility in Petersburg, Virginia. He filed one appeal. It was denied. His wife filed for divorce 3 months after the conviction. His pension, 22 years of service, is gone. When he gets out, he will never wear a badge again, never carry a service weapon, never hold any position of public trust. He will, however, have to live in a world where 6 minutes and 43 seconds of video will follow him for the rest of his life. Every job application, every Google search of his name, every room he walks into where someone pulls out a phone and whispers, "Wait, isn't that the guy from the Café video?" That's his sentence beyond the sentence. And it doesn't have an end date. Todd Brannigan left law enforcement entirely. He moved out of Briarwood, enrolled in a social work program at Virginia Commonwealth University, and hasn't spoken publicly about the incident, except once, in a short interview with a local paper. He said 7 words that carried more weight than most people manage in a lifetime. I could have stopped it. I didn't. He paused, then added, I have to live with that. And I should. Nina Castellano installed a security camera inside the Copper Kettle the week after the incident. She testified before a state legislative committee in Richmond about the need for bystander intervention training, teaching everyday people how to step in safely when they witness something wrong. Her testimony helped push forward a bill that is still working its way through the Virginia General Assembly. She still puts out a lemon scone for Gloria every Saturday morning. On the House, no exceptions. And the teenage girl who filmed it all? She's in college now, studying journalism. Never gave a single interview. Never posted a follow-up. Never tried to make $1 off the video. When a classmate asked why she kept recording after her father told her to stop, she shrugged. Because somebody had to. That's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. Justice shouldn't depend on status. It shouldn't matter whether the man in the cafe is a federal agent or a school teacher, a CEO or a mechanic. The Constitution doesn't have a VIP section. Dignity isn't something you earn by flashing a badge. And rights don't come with a membership card. The real measure of a just society was never about how it treats the powerful. It's about how it treats the person with no title to invoke, no credential to reveal, no viral video to save them. Just a name and a right to exist in a room without being told they don't belong. So here's my question, and I don't want you to scroll past it. I want you to sit with it. If Caleb hadn't been FBI, if he'd just been a man having coffee with his mom on her birthday, would anyone have ever known his name? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, angry, sad, hopeful, or all three at once, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one, because stories like this only matter if people hear them.
Do you know what the story taught me? People don't respect you for who you are. They respect the title, the badge, the position. With more looked at the celeb and saw a black man in a cafe. Nobody was respecting. But the second he saw those three letters, FBI, suddenly it's served. Suddenly he's seeking. Same man, same face, nothing changed except a piece of metal in a leather case. And that's the problem. We don't see people, we see status, we see power, and if you don't have it, you are invisible. But here's what I need you to understand. Your worth is not your job title, it's not your bank account, it's not three letters on the badge. You are worthy of respect just because you exist. Period. And anyone who only judged you right after they find what you are, they never respected you. They respected your position. There's the difference, a big one. And the other lesson, being quiet, not being safe. Brandigan stood right there. Everybody in that cafe knew it was wrong, but nobody moved. And when you are saying nothing, you are not neutral. You are choosing a side. You just don't want to admit which one. Think about this. Do you respect people for who they are or for what they have? Tell me in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe. Real stories, real justice every week. And remember, you don't owe the world proof that you matter. You already do.